I didn't expect my wife to be open to an intimate relationship with her friend and her boss. I thought if she was going to cheat on me, she would try and do a much better job of hiding it. I've known her best friend and her husband for a long time. It took me by surprise that she let them in on her secret, even more so that my wife was willing to be physical with her best friend. The level of convincing and maneuvering that her boss had to do to make that happen was off the chart. That being said, going through my wife's text messages before and after the fling led me to discover a lot more about her. I previously mentioned how I heard her taking a picture in the bathroom before she jumped in the shower the night before the affair with her boss. I later found out that she was sending pictures to her friend and her husband too, and that they were both talking about how nervous they were for the next day. My wife's best friend is a cutie. She's a bit shorter than my wife, thin but not muscular. She has an average-sized chest and a round butt. She has a great smile and an over-the-top laugh. Her husband is a light-skinned Mexican guy. He's about as tall as my wife and comes across as the quiet type, the kind that drinks beer but doesn't say much. He works outside, so he's thin and has a decent body. On the surface, he's kind of a boring guy. The two of them seem good for each other. Now that we're all caught up, let me say that I don't have a trust issue with my wife, even though I should. People continue to comment and speculate why I don't get angry at her when she sleeps with other men. The answer is complicated. It's not like I don't feel anything. I do. It's always a slight sting at first, then I remember my wife and I have been together since we were in our early teens. That's a long time to stay together with somebody and never experience anything with any other people. In a strange way, it's a relief knowing that I could go out and enjoy myself for an evening guilt-free. People enjoy the idea of having multiple partners. Most married men wish they could be with someone else at least once. I'm sure women feel the same way, not everyone, but it's common. Going through my wife's iMessages between her and her best friend before their hookup with the dentist was interesting. Her best friend asked her to send a picture of her body and said her husband wanted to see it too. It took me off guard that people I'd known for so many years were interested in such things because I'd never caught wind of it when we all hung out. We've been to the movies together on double dates, gone out to dinner, and had them over for UFC fights, birthdays, barbecues, you name it. In all honesty, though, it was a turn-on knowing that this couple was flirting with my wife and also that her best friend's husband was aware of the hookup with the dentist. The picture my wife sent to them showed her backside. I read through many of the messages her friend texted. He wanted her to bring more of mine too. Some of the messages were deleted, so I don't know what they were talking about. It wasn't until I read more that I saw messages like the one her best friend sent, saying how crazy the experience had been. When the two of them texted, they weren't the slightest bit shy. My wife told her friend that she was sore and felt like she needed another shower. They texted on and off but didn't mention much about what happened. There was a string of texts about 4 days later that caught my eye. Her friend said, "We need to go back to that 2 for $20 sale." My wife replied, "Why? So your husband can keep more of mine?" Oh. Her friend wrote back, "He legit still has them. I think he has a crush." After that, she deleted the rest of the conversation. I assumed they were talking about my wife's underwear. Apparently, when they were done at the dentist's house, my wife's best friend took home my wife's panties for her husband to enjoy. I couldn't believe any of this was happening. It was the best and the worst feeling in the world. On the one hand, my wife was clearly sleeping around. On the other, I was able to watch my wife's hottest friend be intimate with their boss and my wife. A huge range of emotions are part of the territory with these sorts of experiences. At this point, I knew to ignore the bad and lean into the good side of it. I continued to think about the text messages I'd read while my wife was in the shower. After thinking about it, I decided to take a bold step. Like before, I felt the right move was to reach out to the guy. This guy probably had a heart attack when I sent him the first message. I told him that anything we talked about needed to stay between us. I told him he couldn't tell his wife that we were talking because it would risk ruining my relationship with my wife. If that were to happen, I told him we would have more than words about these text messages I shared with him and his wife. He must have been relieved when I told him right up front I knew he was into my wife and wanted to help him out. He was hesitant to buy into what I told him at first. He thought I was trying to trick him. I told him I'd already read the text messages and told him I knew everything that was going on among everyone. I knew he was aware of everything that was going on too. I also told him that I knew he used my wife's underwear. My mind was going 1,000 miles an hour, knowing these people for as long as I had. There was something so taboo about having a conversation with him about my wife. He told me it was the first time he and his wife had done anything like this, that the threesome with my wife only happened because their boss was really persistent. The boss had no idea that the best friend's husband knew about the affair. I didn't want him to know that I was the one that helped set it up. Our conversations didn't really go anywhere. I stopped replying to him and he stopped replying to me. A couple of days went by, and then I got an idea. I wrote to him, "Now that I know about your feelings for my wife, we should figure out a way to make something happen." I thought I was being a mastermind behind another great scheme. He sent me a couple of screenshots from a conversation he was already having in the group text with his wife and mine. The three of them were talking about meeting up. My heart wanted to jump out of my chest, even though I wanted to set up a similar arrangement. The feeling I got when I found out they were doing this on their own made my stomach turn. You never get used to that feeling. The conversation was moving forward. My wife didn't say a lot, but he did. I couldn't see the screenshots from the beginning of the conversation, so I'm not sure who started it. What he sent me was basically them agreeing that they could meet up once for fun, but that he could only watch. His wife didn't want to go solo with my wife. It's funny to think that she had her own reservations but was willing to hook up with her boss and my wife with no problem. So the two of them were going to hook up in front of her husband, but he could only watch. This was the hottest thing I could have ever heard. It seems completely made up even when I think about it now. The idea that my wife, a shy Mexican girl who never really thought outside the box in the bedroom for as long as we've been together, is now having a conversation with her best friend about doing something pretty wild. He cropped the picture in a way that cut off the rest of the conversation. He told me that they were talking about meeting up in the future, but they didn't have a date yet. I still felt like I wanted to control what was going on now that I knew that I was on to them. I used it as leverage. I told him the only way I would let this happen is if he recorded the encounter. I wanted to see the whole thing from start to finish, but without anyone knowing. He told me he didn't know of a way to do that. I said then it wasn't going to happen. He said he would think of something. A few days later he sent me a screenshot of a little USB camera that he bought on Amazon. He said he was going to set it up in the bedroom if it ever went through. The fact that he went out of his way to buy it made me think that they already had a date set up and that he wanted a recording of it as well. I didn't hear anything for a while. I reached out once and asked if their conversation continued. He said his wife briefly mentioned it, but they hadn't really talked about it more as a group. He did reveal he was using my wife's underwear. He still had them. He told me that part of the deal when his wife hooked up with the dentist was that she would bring back a pair of my wife's panties. He also told me that his wife told him all the details. I already knew most of the details from the doctor's perspective, but it was interesting that his wife told him a lot of the same stuff but left out a few details. According to him, the doctor did not finish on their faces. He blasted on my wife's butt, and his wife lapped it up. He also said that the doctor gave his wife and mine a hickey on their inner thighs. He was angry about this for some reason. I never noticed it on my wife's thigh, but she doesn't let me see her body with the lights on. He was curious if I was attracted to his wife. I was straight up and aggressive. I told him that I'd beaten off to his wife's pictures millions of times. He didn't like me telling him this. Apparently, he thought it was okay for everyone to bang my wife, but if I wanted to do the same to his, that was a problem. I decided to sweeten the deal and told him that if they meet up, I would like some underwear of my own, along with the recording. I told him it was only fair. I'm not big on using lingerie, but I wanted to show him that I had some control. He agreed to find me a pair. This led to a separate event that I will try to cover if anyone wants to hear it. What felt like months passed by, and then he sent me a text saying he got tickets to a football game and that we should all go. I told him it would be even cooler if I said I was going to go, but at the last minute backed out, leaving my wife with them. He must have had a light bulb moment as soon as I made the suggestion. He agreed it would be a perfect opportunity to get my wife alone and that they could go back to their place after the game. He said he was going to talk to his wife and would get back to me if she took it seriously. He told his wife we'd all go to the game together. He told me then he would think of a way to say he only managed to get 3 tickets at the very last minute. That way, His wife didn't know I was backing out on purpose? There were a lot of moving parts, but it seemed the only way to get the three of them alone and make it seem accidental.